welcome to Elephant Fest. We have Santa Montefiore joining us today from London.
That's right, from London.
From London. First of all, I have here your Romanian covers. I wanted to show them to you. Oh. This is The House by the Sea.
Yes, beautiful cover.
Yes, I know, but look at this one. The Secret of the Lighthouse.
Oh my God, you've done them really beautifully. They're stunning.
I know. I'm sorry, I don't have here my favorite, which is The Temptation of Gracie. But I lent it to someone and I didn't get it back so far. So
that's okay. That's okay.
The Temptation of Gracie was the first book written by you that I read, and it was one of the very few that I gave a 5-star review on Goodreads.
Thank you so much. That's really kind of you. I adored writing that book.
Yes, and I adored reading it, and I told everyone they should read it, and I also gave it to my mom because I felt she needed, you know, the pervasive feeling of hope in that book, because we lost my father a few years back, and I really felt like my mother needed to pick me up, you know, a pick me up book. She's been reading a lot ever since, so I gave her that book, and she loved it very much. So thank you for writing that.
Oh, well, I'm so thrilled. I'm really pleased that she that it gave her some comfort. That's kind of you to say. Thank you.
Before I move on to my questions, why don't I ask you something about The Temptation of Gracie, and then we can move on to the other questions. So I absolutely adored it. You know why? Because the main character is an elderly woman. I love reading about love or rekindling your spirit in the old age. Other books feature older women as well. For example, I read The Secrets of the Lighthouse, and it has Peg.
Yes.
Do you have a fondness for elderly women? How do you manage to write them so well, since you're obviously still very young?
I love writing on a big canvas, and I love having a woman, an older person who's experienced so much of life, because obviously somebody in their 60s, 70s, 80s can look back over this vast canvas of their experience, and a lot of people grow in wisdom, and they become more philosophical. They're just wise. I mean, the old people I know are really wise. So, you know, Peg or Gracie. I think also, I'm sort of mumbling here, but also I think I like doing the generations. So I like having 3 generations. I like the grandmother, the daughter, the grandchild. I've just written Here and Now, that's out now in the UK. And that's also about elderly people with their children. I like the generations. I like the interaction of family. And I feel very tender towards old people. I love the fact that they've grown wise due to experience, and they give so much. I think they give so much tenderness to a novel. I loved writing about Gracie. She's one of my favorite characters ever.
Mine too. And I also liked the interaction between all 3, grandmother, mother, daughter.
Yeah. It's interesting because you get the 3 different perspectives of life. And, you know, I can identify obviously with a 40, I'm 50 now. I keep thinking I'm 40, but I'm actually 51. So I can identify with a woman in her sort of 40s and 50s. And I've got a daughter who's 20 years old, and obviously my mother. So it's just quite fun to have, you know, the interaction of the different ages. But I based Gracie actually on my aunt. She doesn't look my aunt necessarily, but my aunt was a really good ballet dancer when she was young, and her father forbid her to go on the stage. He was Irish and very strict and quite religious, and so she wasn't able to fulfill her dream of becoming a ballet dancer. And now she's in her 80s, and nobody would imagine that she'd ever been a really beautiful dancer. And I thought, so fascinating when you see old people in the street and you just write them off as being old. You know, they're old, they don't do anything. They hang around and they have coffee with their friends, and there they are in the street, and you just write them off. And actually, these people had rich and fascinating lives, and some had amazing adventures, and some had amazing jobs that took them all over the world, or they did really interesting things. And I just love the fact that you can look at a person and and just dismiss them. And actually, you don't realize the richness of their experience and their lives. And so I wanted to show that in Gracie, that she had this wonderful secret past, and yet she looked very ordinary in her older age.
Yeah, with a secret, an artistic secret past, you know, like your aunt may have been, you know, secret ballet dancer.
Yes, exactly. I love that. I find that really interesting.
Now that you mentioned the Irish background of your aunt, I can move on to the Secrets of the Lighthouse.
Yes.
I actually read it, and I read it with an Irish accent.
Did you? That's amazing.
Because it was so fun, you know, and I actually looked Bolly Muldoon on internet. Of course, it doesn't exist. Only Connemara exists.
Yes. And, I always make my places up.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea, actually, because, you know, we might want to go there sometime, and it's better if your imaginary world remains imaginary.
Well, I tell you, it's actually more because if I write about a real place and I don't get it correct, then people will write in and say, you say in 1944 on the 5th of September, there was a thunderstorm. Well, I remember the 5th of September and there was no thunderstorm. So, you know, I do get people writing into me a lot. So I feel if I make up my own place, I can decide where the church is, where the village hall is. I can decide exactly what it's like and make it my own. But I could tell you that, you know, I can tell you exactly where all those places are based, because they are sort of based near real places, near real towns and things.
And where is Bolly?
Well, the Connemara one, I didn't base it in anywhere specific. It was just Connemara. But the Deverell Chronicles, which I don't know whether are published in Romania yet, they're in County Cork, and they're around Bandon, because I went there, and I kind of had the vision in my head. But yeah, but the Connemara one, I don't think I based it near a specific place. I think I've been to Connemara. I used to spend a lot of my childhood holidays in Connemara. So in my head, it's there, but I'm not exactly sure where we used to go because I was a child.
I felt cold all the time reading it, because it was so cold all the time, but still the characters loved it very much. So
I think it is quite cold in Ireland a lot.
Since this book was a bit on the spiritual side, I don't want to give away too much from the subject. It included ghosts. Are you a spiritual person? Do you believe in other dimensions?
Yes, very much. So I'm very psychic. All through my childhood, I saw spirits a lot. I'd see them in the middle of the night. People assume, who don't really know, that ghosts come out at night. They don't come out at night. They're there all the time. They're a bit like stars. So we see stars at night, but we can't see them in the day, but they're still there. So I would see them at night because my conscious mind would shut up, and then my subconscious mind would become more sensitive, and I'd pick up movement in my bedroom because of my psychic subconscious mind.
The child in the book sees his mother once or twice.
Exactly. So that's the same thing. So that used to happen to me a lot when I was a child.
Did anyone believe you?
I didn't talk about it. I thought it was normal. I probably assumed everybody saw people in their bedrooms at night. I never really discussed it with anybody until I got into my teenage years. And then I discussed it with my father, who's very spiritual. And then we used to share books. We still share books, which is really fun. He's very into all of that as well. So I had my soulmate to talk to about these things. And I still see spirits now. So most of my books, certainly in the latter books, rather than the very early books, I write a lot about spirits, because to me, they're a part of my experience and they're a part of life. And I like including them, actually. To me, it adds a layer that is very important, because I believe very strongly that we don't die and that we move on, and that we can still come back and see the people we love. Basically, the people we love never leave us. And that's a message I want to get across in my writing.
That's fantastic. And of course, you have a lot of inspiration. You know, you are very blessed to have this source of inspiration. You don't have to look it very far.
Well, do you know, I was so lucky because when my sister died, she was 45. It was 4 years ago now. And I'd always seen spirits grow, you know, it was normal for me. So I assumed that when she died, I would see her. And yet months went by and nothing happened. And I was really, you know, frustrated because I so wanted to know that she'd got to the right place and that she was okay. And then about 6 months after she died, I woke up in the middle of the night and she was sitting beside me, staring at me. And I think she was going, Santa, 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 like that, trying to wake me up. And it was such a wonderful experience that it wasn't until that moment that I realized what a gift it was, because before, the people that I saw, I didn't know. They just happened to be in my bedroom for whatever reason, but they weren't there for me. Whereas my sister came through, one of the only people that's actually come through for me. I've had an experience with 2 Argentine friends of mine that died, and they came through to me in a meditation about 6 years before. But usually it's not people I know that I see. I just wake up and see random people. So the fact that my daughter came through was really, not my daughter, my sister came through was absolutely astonishing, and just showed me what a wonderful gift it is.
You must have felt really comforted afterwards.
I did. It made all the difference.
Did you share that with your parents?
Yes, I shared it with my mother, and my sister had been wearing a baby pink t-shirt. And when I told that to my mother, she was astonished because she buried her in a baby pink t-shirt and no one knew. She hadn't told anybody what she buried her in. It just never came up in conversation. And so I think my sister projected herself in that baby pink t-shirt to show my mother that she was really there, because I knew she was there. I had no doubt. But, you know, my mother's a little bit more skeptical. Needs convincing. So that was quite an important and quite an amazing thing, actually.
That's fantastic. You are lucky to have had such an experience.
I think so.
What was your first book about, and how did you end up publishing it?
My first of all, I've always written. So as a child, I wrote children's books for my own entertainment, very much derived from the children's books that I had read as a child, whether it was Winnie the Pooh or, you know, little rabbit stories, things like that. And then as a teenager, I wrote teenage sort of love stories for my friends. And it wasn't until my 20s that I'd been to Argentina as a 19-year-old, absolutely loved it and felt I belonged. And after a year, I came back to England, and I went to university in England and saved up to go back to Argentina a year later. And when I went back to Argentina, everything had changed. The place hadn't changed, but I no longer was part of it. I no longer had a job. A lot of the young people that I had made friends with had gone to study in different parts of the world. Basically, I wanted that year back, and I couldn't get it back. So that was the theme of Meet Me Under the Ombu Tree, which is my first novel, which was really an allegory of my love affair with Argentina. And I wrote a 50,000 word little book, and I sent it off to 3 agents, and they all said no. And then I sent it to a 4th agent who amazingly came back and said she loved it, but she wanted a much bigger story. So I then added another 50,000 words, and we sent it off and got a publishing deal. And then the editor at my publisher then wanted another 50,000 words. So it started off as a very small book, became a rather big book. And that was how I first got published. I think it was just, it's a hobby that turned into a job, which I'm very lucky because I really love doing it.
That sounds fantastic. And how many books do you have published until now?
Well, I write 1 a year. And this year I have written 2 extra books. And actually I've written 3 extra books this year because of lockdown. So
you've been very productive.
So I've actually published 22, but I have written 24 because there are 2 that are still waiting to be published. And I've also written 4 children's books as well with my husband. So quite a lot of books.
I'm very interested to hear about your children's books projects because I mostly translate children's books. I'm a translator. And I love this universe a lot. Of course, I have children, but I've always been a fan of children's books even before I had children.
Oh, well, your English is extremely good, so it doesn't surprise me that you translate
Thank you.
books.
So tell me more about your children's books.
So my son when he was 6 years old, he's now 18. So a long time ago, he woke up. No, he didn't want to go to bed one night because he was afraid of something. So I said, well, think of something you love. And he said, rabbits. And I said, where do they live? He said, under Buckingham Palace. And it was like, wow, that's amazing. And so the Royal Rabbits of London was created. My husband and I wrote 4 of them together. It's basically about a secret society of really cool rabbits who live under Buckingham Palace and protect the royal family from the evils of the world. And the hero, which is a little country rabbit called Shiloh, who hears a plot to harm the Queen and has to find the royal rabbits and warn them. He ends up becoming a part of this secret society of royal rabbits. And he's a very little country bunny. And these rabbits are really huge. I mean, they're massive, great, big, cool rabbits. And he's a tiny little shy, rather weak and feeble little rabbit, but he's extremely brave. And so it's about his adventures with the Royal Rabbits of London. And they're really fun. They're for 7 to 11-year-old children.
Now that you mentioned the subject, I think it has been published into Romania as well.
Oh, good. I hope so.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Because you mentioned you worked on this children's book series with your husband.
Yes.
I was curious. Do you ever exchange ideas or brainstorm together? So
basically, with my normal books, he actually can be very helpful because as a historian, my novels are often historic. So I'm able to say, okay, it's 1944, we're in Italy, where are the Germans? And so he can be quite helpful there. Also with my Deverell Chronicles, part of one of the characters goes to New York and becomes part of the mafia. And my husband knows a lot about Lucky Luciano and all those characters back, I think it's in the 20s and 30s. Anyway, so he helped me with that. So he can be quite useful to me. I'm not very useful to him because my knowledge of history is not very good. But he writes novels as well. So I read his novels and I can definitely tell him, what I think about those. But the history, I can just tell him if I understand it. And if I understand it, that's a pretty good thing. Then he knows that at least the lowest common denominator is going to understand his book. But he's more helpful to me than the other way around, without question.
You've obviously been writers for years, both of you. How did you manage to balance your work life?
Well, I think what's quite interesting in life is that you survive, you can sort of survive anything because you just get used to a certain way of living. So when I moved in with my husband, we got married and we wrote in the same flat together. We had a really small flat and we had a small dining room and he wrote at a desk and I wrote at the dining room table. And we had 2 small children at that point and we were really, stuck in this tiny room. And yet I wrote 5 novels. We were there for 5 years. And he wrote, I think, 2 history books and I wrote my things and he'd have his music on and I'd want my music on and I'd have a scented candle lit and he'd blow it out. And so, we weren't very compatible. In the end, I put earphones on so I could listen to my music and not have to listen to his. But we survived and, we did it perfectly well. And yet now we live in a house. I'm on the top floor. I have my own office. I'm actually in the sitting room at the moment. So this is a sort of neutral room, but he has his own office too. And I have all this space and I cannot imagine how we survived working together in a little dining room. But I think you just survive with what you've got. You just make it work, and we made it work.
Definitely. I was listening to an interview. It wasn't an interview, actually. It was a video from 2009. It was a presentation for Simon & Schuster. And you were saying, the children are at school, my husband is at work, and no one can disturb me now. And
yes, I remember that. Yes.
How was it during the pandemics with everyone at home?
So it was okay. I was so productive. We were in the country because we've got a cottage on my parents' farm in Hampshire. So my children, because my son was doing online lessons. So he was actually really busy with his work in his room. My daughter wasn't really doing much. She was meant to be at university, but she didn't really have much work to do. So she was just about. And my husband was in London, so he wasn't with us. I had this lovely conservatory with all this light coming in. It was beautiful weather. And I just had nothing else to do but write. So I wrote a comedy, which maybe will come out in Romania, called Flappy, which is, anyway, that's out here now. And I've written the sequel for next year. And then I wrote another book. So actually I was really busy and it worked for me. I mean, lockdown, what I struggle with is finding time to write, because normally London's very busy. I want to go and have lunch with my friends. There's always something on. And so finding a day when I'm actually at my desk all day is quite a challenge. Whereas in lockdown, I had no temptations. I had nothing to do. So actually, I have been really productive. It really worked.
Except making your own lunch.
Except making my own lunch. But I don't mind because I don't really eat. I snack, and the children are now old enough to make their own things. So I made one meal every day. So I'd make lunch. So whether it was a roast chicken or fish or something, and then they snacked for the rest of the day and they had smoked salmon and a baked potato or something for dinner. But I said, I will do one meal a day and then you sort yourselves out for the rest of the day. And that worked quite well.
That's fantastic to be able to say that. I have smaller kids, so obviously I'm not there yet.
No, you're certainly not if you've got little kids. Luckily, my children are quite grown up, so they can do their own thing.
Since you talked about food, of course, my mind immediately sprang to Tuscany. It seems that you have a soft spot for Italy because you included it in some of your books. What is it that you like about Italian culture?
Well, what I love in my writing is going to different places. So after writing the Deborah series, and I'm not sure whether it's published in Romania yet, but there are 5 books. The 5th comes out this July. So 5 books based in Ireland. And as you know from the Connemara book, it's cold, it's drizzly, it's gothic, it's sort of...
And they eat a lot of potatoes.
They really do eat a lot of potatoes. They literally do eat a lot of potatoes. So the atmosphere of Ireland is, I was with that for 5 years writing those books. So to go to Italy where it's warm, it's sort of sun-ripened tomatoes and olive groves and lemon groves and vines, and that beautiful, just sunshine and Tuscan hills and gardenia and jasmine, eucalyptus trees. I mean, it's so fragrant and so sensual and so warm, and it's just a very different tone. So I get bored if I write the same thing all the time. So going to Italy after Ireland was just wonderfully refreshing, and it allows me to use different adjectives. If I'm writing about Ireland all the time, I'm writing about the mist and the heather and the hills and the cliffs and the tormented sea and the roar of the waves, and I'm writing about that a lot. And so I need a change. So Italy for me is always a change. And I've just finished my book for next year, which is another book based in Italy in the 30s and 40s, actually. So again, I'm going back to Italy. I love it.
How often do you go there?
Gosh, I'd love to go there all the time. I go there a lot though, not every year necessarily, but I lived there when I was 21. I was studying Italian and Spanish at university, so I had to go and spend a year in Italy. So I went off to Milan. A lot of childhood holidays were in Italy. My husband loves Italy, so we go there together. We went last summer. We pretty much go every year if we can. We go down to Sicily, or we took our children on a big tour to Rome, Florence, Siena. Where else did we go? We sort of did a trip just so that they could, see and experience and learn a bit about Italy. And they loved it too. I mean, I think everyone loves Italy. I think it's just one of everybody's favorite places. And I often get emails from people saying, oh, please write about Italy again.
Can you tell us about one great or uplifting moment as a writer, and also about an embarrassing one?
Okay, well, the embarrassing ones are easier because there are so many.
Oh, God. I didn't expect that. I thought it would be hard.
No, it's difficult, funnily enough, because, on one hand, I'll get an email from somebody saying, I absolutely adore your books, and I'll get the most wonderful email. And then I'll go on book tour to somewhere like America, and this really happened. I was in somewhere like Milwaukee or Kansas City, one of these places. And I was due to give a talk to readers, and this was about 10 years ago. It was a long time ago. And
what book were you promoting?
I can't, it could easily have been something like The Last Voyage of the Valentina, one of those, my 6th book. So, you know, I'm now on 23, so it's a long time ago. And they had this big bookshop next to this big conference room filled with chairs and a big podium and posters with my face on and my books and everything. And this huge room, but we had to walk through the bookshop first. So when the woman, you know, was taking me through, I saw this huge room with all these seats, and there wasn't anyone sitting in any seat at all. It was totally empty, except for one man at the back in a baseball cap reading a book that wasn't mine. And I said to the woman, "Oh, what time am I on?" And she looked at her watch and she said, "Like now?" And there was no one, literally just one person. So it was like, oh my God, you know, what am I going to do? So I went to the man at the back and I said, "Oh my God, you're my only fan." And he looked really embarrassed and said, "Actually, I'm just waiting for my wife and kids to finish shopping." He wasn't even there for me. He was just sitting down while his wife and kids shopped. So
that must have felt horrible.
Horrible. And that happens quite a lot, you know. I mean, that sort of thing. I go on book tours now to Holland and Belgium and Norway, where I'm a big bestseller. So I get a lot of attention.
If I'm Romania too.
Okay, I'll come to Romania. But if I'm asked to go somewhere where I don't have a big readership, I'll be quite careful about what I do. I won't book any talks. I'll do interviews, go and meet booksellers, go and sign books in bookshops, things like that. But I would never commit to doing a talk unless I was really sure that there were going to be people there to listen to me, because it's the most embarrassing thing, turning up and there's no one there.
I know. I've been doing events because I'm very active with books and book fairs. And I know how it feels when you keep looking towards the door and hoping someone will come.
Yes. And you feel, yes, so you can go. That's the thing. So I suppose I don't know whether actors, you know, it just goes from being wonderful to being really not wonderful very quickly. So you're never allowed to get arrogant. I mean, I think there are certain writers like J.K. Rowling who are always going to be in demand, and she must feel on top of the world all the time because she's so massive. But for the rest of us, we go from feeling very popular to feeling very unpopular quite quickly. So we're never allowed to grow complacent or be too pleased with ourselves, which maybe is a good thing.
Yes, and I think this is a good advice, right? For writers wannabe.
Yes.
Never get too arrogant about your writing.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And also, you know, one is always really grateful to one's readers. I'm so grateful to my readers. I don't think I will ever take them for granted, because without my readers, I won't be writing. I'll write for myself, but if I don't have people to read my books, I won't get published. So when people write to me, I write back immediately. I'm very grateful for people who read my books.
You are so very nice, and I'm sure your readers appreciate it a lot.
I hope so.
So what do you do when you're not writing? Do you have any hobbies?
I like reading. I used to play the piano and sing. In the old days, I wanted to be a singer-songwriter. So at that time, I wasn't sure whether I was going to write books. At that time, I really didn't think I'd ever get a book published. I didn't even think I'd try. It wasn't in my vision at all. I just wrote for fun. So that time I really wanted to be a singer-songwriter. So that I used to do a lot of, but you know, my voice has gone now because I'm older, I'm in my 50s and I don't sing anymore. So when I try and sing, I can't reach the notes. It's really annoying. And
can you sing an Irish song, you know, like in the book?
No, I can't. I don't think I can sing anything now, but that used to be my biggest hobby. Otherwise, I think I'm always busy. I mean, I love, you know, I muck about in my house. I'm always rearranging things and sorting out books, or I'm very house proud. So I'm constantly in my house doing stuff. I don't really.
Your husband let you rearrange his books?
No, I don't rearrange his books, but I have my office upstairs, which has just been redecorated, and it's because there was a leak over Christmas, so I had to have it redecorated. It's absolutely gorgeous. I've been very busy with that. I think, to be honest, writing is my biggest hobby, that if I'm not writing my big book, which I do once a year, then I'm writing short stories for magazines, or I've written, another comedy. So I just love it. I think I'm always writing. I think that's probably what I do most of.
How is it writing comedy versus writing drama?
Very different, although most of my books have comedy in them. There are usually characters that are funny in the books, because if I'm dealing with heartbreak, unrequited love, if you think of the Temptation of Gracie, there's a lot of emotion in there. So you need to have funny minor characters who just give the reader a bit of entertainment and humor. So, and in fact, do you remember Flappy in the Temptation of Gracie, that ghastly woman? So the comedy is her, it's about her. It's called Flappy Entertains. So from that book, I thought it'd be really fun to write a series about Flappy, which I've done. So yes, writing a comedy, it's not, funny enough, it's not different in, one still has to sort of be very disciplined and sit down and write and all that. But I think it's much lighter, and I can be very silly. When I write my big books, I'm not so silly. I think the comedy, you can really be very silly, and you can write in a way that maybe I wouldn't get away with writing like that in my normal books. You literally can say, her breasts heaved with, the passion, or, you can kind of go very over the top in a comedy. I wouldn't write like that in my normal books, because I'm just being funny.
While reading, do you read
Yes.
while writing, do you read any fiction?
I read a lot, but when I'm writing, I tend to read things for research. So, when I was writing The Temptation of Gracie, I had to read books about art. When I was writing The Secrets of the Lighthouse, I didn't have to do any research for that one. The Deverell Chronicles is all about the War of Independence in Ireland. So I had to do a lot of research about that. So I think if I'm writing one of those big historical books, I don't really have much time to read for pleasure. Right now, I am reading for pleasure, but I don't really have enough time to read for pleasure, because I'm getting the notes back now with the new comedy, the new Flappy one, from my editor, so I'm going to have to work on that. So I don't really have as much time as I'd like to read. I need a holiday. We need to open up the borders so that we can all go traveling again. Then I can lie on a beach and take my favorite novels with me.
Let's sign a petition for that.
I know. And it's raining here, let me tell you. So I think we could do with a bit of sunshine.
What was the last book you read, a fiction book?
The last fiction book I read, God.
Don't worry if you don't remember.
No, do you know what? I can't even think.
It's been so long.
I've been so researching my Italian book, is Italy in the War in the 30s and 40s. So I think probably the last one was The Garden of the Pinci Continis by Giorgio Bassani. But I read that as a student, and when I was 20 years old, and now I was reading it again. So I think but I was reading it for research, although it's the most wonderful book. It's one of my favorites. So I have all these fictions piled up on my bedside table. I'm reading, though, a lot of esoteric books. I read a lot of books about like Eckhart Tolle and Joe Dispenza, and spiritual books. I really love those. So I've got a few of those piled up on I'm reading a bit more about that now, actually, than fiction right now.
I want to check, a myth about how they say that children will become readers if they see their parents read. Your children, did they read a lot, or do they read a lot?
I think that's a myth, personally. I think actually it can have the opposite effect, because my son is an avid reader. And my daughter has become an avid reader, but she wasn't. And I think we put her off because we were always telling her to read. And my husband especially was giving her books and wanting to know what she thought about them. So I think you can actually put too much pressure on a child. That what got them into reading, funnily enough, was Roald Dahl. The Roald Dahl books got both of them into reading. And then Harry Potter swept my son away. And he's still...
Obviously. My daughter as well.
Yeah. And at 18 years old, my son still goes back and reads all the Harry Potter books. He absolutely loves them. Yeah, 18 years old.
So this passion will go on forever.
Yes, no, without question. He has a love affair with Harry Potter. But I think it's a myth, actually. I know quite a few people who have children and they're very big into books and their children aren't interested. I think the child is just the way the child is. I think you can encourage them, and that, you know, it's a question of finding books that really inspire you. And I think for me, there are a lot, I get sent books every day from publishers, and you know, most of them, I read the first couple of pages and they just don't inspire me. You know, I'm quite hard to please, but when I get a book that I love, oh my goodness, like Edith Wharton, The Age of Innocence, one of my favorite books ever, you know, I read that.
Obviously, you put it in the Secrets of the Lighthouse.
Yes, exactly, I did.
And you made me curious, you know, because everybody's asking what's the end of the book. And
you will absolutely love that book. It's one of my favorites. So I think, you know, as a child, if you give them a book that somehow grabs them, and it's just a question of finding out what sort of thing they like, because they don't know what they're like when they're a child. They need to, you know, go through quite a lot of books to find the genre that they are interested in. And so it's a bit of a labor, I think, but it's worth the effort. As soon as they find something that they really love, then that can get them into reading. I also think that too much television and computer games mean that, you know, reading a book requires a bit of effort. Sometimes it takes a few pages to actually get into it. Whereas you watch a movie or a computer game, you're into it immediately. And children now have very short attention spans and little patience. So I think that, unfortunately, isn't helping.
Your daughter is a young lady. Did she read any of your novels?
She has not. And I don't think, funnily enough, that my novels are going to rock her boat necessarily. She's much more into darker books. You know, she probably likes suspense and thrillers, those sort of things. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not one of those for her.
No, I just don't think my books are going to rock her boat, actually. She's like my husband. They have very similar taste in books.
I see. Is she oriented towards writing as well?
She's an extremely good writer, but I think we've put her off by telling her what a good writer she is and encouraging her. And I think it's made her go the other way. I think possibly when she's older and she has a bit of experience of life, I think as soon as you feel something very deeply, that's when you want to write about it. So I think in time she might come round. And I certainly think when she's had a job and had to get up at 6 in the morning and go into an office, she's going to realize that actually writing at home is quite nice.
So you said you wrote a book a year ever since you started writing?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a lot of work, not only to actually write it, but to find new and original plot lines and develop them. How do you do it? Do you have a pool of ideas and you pick one, or they just come as you write?
You know, I'm just really lucky, I think. At the moment, I'm full of inspiration. So sometimes, you know, I hear a story. I mean, the book that I've written about Italy I sat next to a man at dinner about 20 years ago, and he told me his mother's story. And it was the most extraordinary story. I said, can I write that? And he said, well, you have to wait until my mother's died. Anyway, his mother has died, but I haven't written the story as he told it. I couldn't do it that way. So I had to sort of find a way of doing it. So I actually have done it, but it's not, but that was given to me by him, you know.
Which book was that? Which book was it?
It's coming out next year.
Ah, okay.
So that's the one for next year. So that was inspired by his mother's story. It's not his mother's story, but there's a little part of her story that I think is really fascinating. So I've just taken that little part and built a story around it. And then otherwise, I just, you know, I can read something in the newspaper and think that's interesting. I mean, my niece actually in the car the other day, I was driving her somewhere, and she said, you know, what if, and she started talking about my parents and said, well, what if, you know, Granny died and then Grandpa fell in love with another woman. She started talking about this story. And then there was a horrific bit about it. And I said, oh my God, that's amazing. I've got to write it. So she gave me an idea, which I might use. She's 25.
Okay.
So she gave me, so I said, that's a very interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that. So sometimes, you know, just in a conversation, you only need something very small or a theme to then build a whole book around. You know, it's like if you think Secrets of the Lighthouse, that was me thinking, okay, so actually I can't really talk, I might ruin the story, but you know, that came from a what if. yes, it's just sort of daydreaming, I think, most of the time.
That's fantastic. Thank you for today's talk. It was fabulous. I was actually really looking forward to it. In the end, I would like to ask you if you could, send a message to your Romanian readers.
Yes, I certainly can. I would like to thank my Romanian readers. I have never been to Romania, but I'd absolutely love to go. One of my husband's best friends is Romanian, and he lives in London, but he goes often back to Romania. And he's always saying, you must come and see us there, because I think he's got a beautiful place, and he says it's absolutely beautiful. And I know it's beautiful. I've seen pictures, and I really would love to go. So hopefully one day I can come and thank you in person. But in the meantime, Romania, I love you. I love my Romanian readers, and I'm really appreciative of you just being interested in my books and reading them. Because if you read my books, then I get to come and visit your country, which would be a massive bonus and a treat for me. So thank you.
And we promise never to leave any empty chairs in front of you.
Please don't leave any empty chairs. No, I can't go through that again.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Well, you're really sweet to interview me. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.